right. Guess we'll get started. Okay, go away, little bar thing. A couple more still coming in. Okay. Yeah, I was really I don't actually know that song. I just picked a mix, but it was like more awake than I felt all day. So welcome to class. Gosh, yeah, I'm also like a 4 or 5 right now, but um we're gonna go through it. We're gonna have class. And still a couple people coming in. If at any point my connection is bad, just tell me and I'll become a floating voice in the ether. And we'll have a little bit of a discussion at the end because last week there was some questions about the possibility of recording the class. So just so you know, don't head out right at the very end of class, or if you're interested in it being recorded, hang around because I just want to see like how many people are interested, different things like this. So is that everything I have to say? Yes. Oh, still a couple coming in. How did you all find the homework last week? How was just like reading psychoanalysis?
Did you finish correcting the first homework?
No, I haven't finished it yet. I'll let you know as soon as it's ready.
Okay. Because it will be nice to have the comments just to
yes, they're coming.
They're coming. Don't make the same mistakes.
Yes, the comments are coming. It's just that I have to prepare for the lectures first. That is the important, urgent thing. So I'm keeping up with those. And I also have a nerve injury. So honestly, I'm doing what I can. They'll be back to you in the next couple of days.
That's okay.
Yeah. There was no quiz last week. Well, there were the 2 replacement quizzes because Microsoft Forms sucks. So go in and do those, and it means you get a chance to redo the quiz all over again. Yeah, okay. So today's class, we're going to talk a little bit more about the psychoanalytic worldview. Can I do that there? And today specifically, we're going to focus on gender and on hysteria. So I talked a little bit about hysteria last time as this kind of disease or disorder that was the main point of concern when Freud started working on psychoanalysis. So today we're going to talk about these things. So first, we're going to talk about the psychoanalytic view of childhood development and gender development. Some of this is going to be really hard and detailed, and the important thing for you for that part, the very beginning, is to get the kind of broad descriptions. Yeah, just like don't panic when you see the slides because there's more information, but it's contextual. Because really today's focus is on hysteria as a diagnosis, as an experience. And we're going to look at one of Freud's very famous patients named Dora and her case. And we're going to also see how psychoanalysis explained this transformation of something in the unconscious into a physical symptom. And we'll talk a little bit about gender, stereotypes, and oppression through all of these. Good. Whew. Yeah, like don't freak out. listen to the story that I'm telling you and absorb as much as you can on these next couple slides. So specifically Freudian psychoanalysis, but many kinds of psychoanalysis, they trace the kinds of steps in our development. So at which point is it that you learn the kinds of things you learn in your superego, that you come to identify yourself as a person who's even separate from your parents? Do you come to understand the way other people work in the world? And Freud had a very specific view about the time, the period of time when children normally discover both the differences in their bodies and the difference in women are treated in society, which is usually, they said, around age 3 to 6. And it's worth being said that in a lot of the original literature, it is just being assumed that everyone, that no one is trans and that everyone who has a certain body is a woman and everyone who has a certain body is a man. So on Freud's picture at this time, he thought what happens is the child, well, what happens for the child is very different depending on if it's a boy child or a girl child. So he said that the boy child unconscious comes to desire his mother. This is the famously called Oedipus complex, and sees his father as a threat. He knows that the way of framing this that I would be more sympathetic to is something like, he sees that his father has power in the household because of the way society and households worked in the 1920s. And from that, right, he knows that this is someone who is controlling things. But for Freud, the boy child realizes that he has a penis and that somehow in this world, having a penis is a correlate to certain kinds of power. And so he's scared about losing that. So Freud thinks that eventually what happens is after a couple of years, yes, I think there's many reasons. I think the general transition of you have so they call it a pre-Oedipal stage, which is like before you've become your own person, before you've separated from the mother. I think generally that holds, that there's a time in our development when you don't have like logic or language. There's a lot of like, yeah, it's like really, really the infancy, right? So until you're about 3. And then I think there's a lot of things that are generally true about the unconscious that we can actually pick at, right? That we can keep. So there's a huge movement of feminist psychoanalysts throughout the 1980s saying, hey, like Freud was wrong about all these things, but there's some things that he was right about, right? So what we need to do is to go in and correct his theory rather than throw it out. That's like the short answer of that, if that helps. But it's like important to talk about and to figure out, also just to be able to have a language to like reply to something, right? To be able to like articulate how and why you find problems with it. So that's like what is happening to the boy child, right? He has these like desires, they're unconscious, it's all unconscious. But eventually Freud thinks the ego says, okay, no, we're gonna repress desires. You're going to listen to what your father says so that he doesn't take away the source of your power. And so it is like an original repression that takes us all into the next stage of life in some way. So like, yeah, this slide, next slide, like broad overviews, you have to know that there's like a transitional moment and that he saw it a bit differently. cross-gender. So sometimes people give this the name Electra complex that comes from Jung, but Freud originally came up with, well, okay, what happens with the girl child then? And he thinks that they do have a desire for their fathers and they want to avoid the mothers, so that at a certain point, they also, part of this is like realizing who may hold the power in the household or in society. And so he says that the child develops penis envy. We all know this is the like commonly made fun of thing. So yeah, on the like harshest critique, it's like, well, you know, that's completely false. On the most generous reading, I would say, girl children probably realize that boy children and men are being treated differently. And in that sense, have a kind of symbolic envy, right? It's not about a literal penis. Let's see. Yeah, exactly. And so Freud does think that eventually the girl child represses these desires as well. And she identifies with the mother, right? So she says like, okay, this is my place, right? Like this is the gendered role that I am assigned here, and it's not the one that has the power. So, and this is one of the things that feminist psychoanalysts will talk about a lot, is that because of this, Freud thinks that women who act manly or men who act womanly might mean that you haven't gone through that stage properly, right? So your ego hasn't repressed what it needed to repress, and instead, you're stuck, right? The girl child is on this picture, like stuck, emulating the father and wanting male power.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Yep. So the patriarchal thing, how women sometimes they'll be masculine and males they will be sometimes feminine. Is that where the idea of homosexuality kind of came from? From like women not like really oppressing the masculinity? Because I feel like when I hear like female masculinity, it always has to do with homosexuality.
Yeah, so in fact, like the history of thinking, I'm teaching a sex and sexuality class right now also, and it's super fun. The history of thinking about homosexuality and the history of thinking about gender norms are tied up, right? So that often we have this picture that the homosexual is one who is not properly attached to their gender in some way. Very good point. I'm not sure who even said it. It was just a voice in the ether, but yeah, so this means that on Freud's view, homosexuals, anybody who's kind of, good. Yeah, so he didn't have a theory about trans people, although he did, many psychoanalysts talked about things like cross-dressing. So they had a very different language, but also you can say that there was a different kind of attachment to these norms. Yeah, so on this picture, not only anyone who's like a bit too gender non-conforming, but also anyone who's homosexual or not heterosexual at very least, is seen as kind of in a state of immaturity, in a state of non-development, right? So that you would need analysis to like help you get blocked. You're still kind of a 3 to a 6-year-old. So that's one problem. And the other thing is that Freud kind of thought that women were less, I say this, I'm like trying to encourage us all to be generous readers and also roast Freud at the same time. Less powerful? Women are less solidly attached to reality, or less solidly able to be their own like individual being, because that transition was not as sharp, that it wasn't a sharp break, that in some ways, like you tried to tear the paper in half and it's still,
Like,
you know, like
it's
it's like this. So that they try to make this break from this infantile stage, and in some sense, this disposes women to more kinds of neuroses. Yeah, in part it's because the motivation of having, the motivation that's like, I want a penis is not as strong, he thinks, as the like threat of castration, of removing one's penis. Yeah, Sia, did you want to say something?
Yeah, it's actually my dad told me this summer, that in ancient Greece, there was something called a circle of brother, and it was called the Ku Klux, and it was basically it was like when they would like penetrate each other when they were like away from their wives, so they would all have sex together, and that's where like people think that like homosexuality kind of originated, was that like from like, yeah, the Romans and the Greeks, like because like they were just always horny, I guess, so they like ended up just like having sex all together.
Like there's always been people having sex with all different kinds of people, you know? And so it's kind of, it is the great myth and paradox of our times, right? That like gay and queer sex can be everywhere and nowhere, or invisibilized in these moments. So much talking. So yeah, keep it in mind that for Freud, this means that women are generally like more stable or more unstable, and the impacts right here of both gender nonconformity and homosexuality, or interest in one's own gender. So I've put a whole bunch of pictures in through this. These are actually older. These are from, these would probably be from the 1870s. So a few years before Freud started working on hysterics. Oh yeah, good. So hysteria, you've heard this word. We talk about someone being hysterical. Sometimes sometimes we call someone hysterical as a way to shut them down, like you're being way too emotional, but we also say things that are hysterically funny. And so hysteria, like the hysteria that psychoanalysis came about to treat, was a version of something that had been around for a long, long time. Speaking of ancient Greece and Rome and Egypt. So the word hysteria, it comes from the word for uterus, the same way that hysterectomy, so that hyster means the uterus. And in ancient times, they didn't have a good understanding of our internal anatomy. So sometimes when women were having problems, they would say that the uterus, the organ, was literally wandering around your body. So our bodies would have to be really damn empty for that to happen. But the thought was, okay, we can't explain what's going on. It must be a kind of hysteria. It must be something that is linked to this organ. And so actually the word has been around for thousands and thousands of years. Many different kinds of illnesses are blamed on it. And earlier in the mid-1800s, so before Freud, as this wave of hysteria was kind of starting, the vibrator was actually invented as a way to treat women with hysteria, because it was assumed that they weren't getting enough sexual stimulation. Yeah.
So true.
Yeah. So hysteria also often has a contagious quality to it. So we talk about mass hysteria. We talk about one person, I think I gave the example when I was talking about the nuns, like, you know, one person says like, oh my God, the building is on fire, and they start running around, and then everybody else kind of starts running around and assuming the building is on fire, a kind of frenzy. Yeah. And so you can look at, there's even like there's a broader group of things that people call hysterical, in this way of something kind of unexplained, contagious, grabbing a group of people. So you're gonna have a little bit on that in one of your readings today. Okay, we're gonna watch a video, which is the best video that I could find that gives us a little snippet about the history of hysteria. Let's see. This one. Okay, so I'll mute myself, and if the video is terribly choppy, please just tell me and I will become a floating head in the void again.
We begin with the story of hysteria, an epidemic that was mysterious, confusing, and unlike other afflictions of its day. It often featured clusters of bizarre and disturbing symptoms that came and went without obvious cause or explanation. Unlike previous epidemics, hysteria seemed to have little regard for race, class, social, or economic status. It struck rich and poor alike.
Descriptions of hysteria date back to ancient Egypt. Explanations have ranged from a wandering uterus to devil worship and witchcraft. In men, similar symptoms were blamed on evil spirits, but also on practices such as studying science, practicing the arts, and involvement in the aristocracy. For example, King Louis XIV was said to have suffered from the vapors, a precursor diagnosis to hysteria. Early treatments were invasive and at times violent, including everything from manipulating the uterus, inserting devices into women's bodies, to burning at the stake.
A representative case of hysteria involved Mary Glover, a 14-year-old girl who lived in 1602. Mary's symptoms began the day after having an upsetting argument with her neighbor.
The next day, Mary felt fine until she saw the same neighbor. She then suddenly reported a choking sensation, and others attested that her throat seemed to swell. She was unable to speak and reported going blind. She experienced seizures and a paralysis that progressed from her hand to her entire left side. Whenever she sensed the neighbor nearby, her symptoms dramatically worsened.
These symptoms continued for weeks. Her body contorted into rigid positions impossible for others to maintain. At times, she moved as if in slow motion. At others, she thrashed frantically. During one fit of paralysis, the sheriff tested her symptoms by burning her skin. While Mary clearly had evidence of burns, she did not respond in the slightest.
In Mary's time, it was very hard to explain her symptoms as anything other than witchcraft. However, people are even more surprised that hysteria continues today. The most sensational of these are episodes of mass hysteria. For example, in North Carolina in 2004, 10 young women had episodes resembling seizures and fainting spells that had no organic etiology. In New York in 2012, 15 teenagers had unexplained outbreaks of spasms, tics, and seizures. There have been documented mass outbreaks of hysterical blindness, skin crawling, paralysis, and inability to speak. On an individual level, these symptoms are clustered together in what are called the somatoform and dissociative disorders.
Somatoform disorders are when physical symptoms are determined to have a psychological cause. Dissociative disorders involve psychological detachment from reality. These conditions are also more common than you might think. A recent study found that 20% of people admitted to a hospital complaining of physical illness actually met criteria for a somatoform disorder. A different study estimated that up to 18% of the general population met criteria for one of the dissociative disorders.
Clearly, hysteria by these other names is alive and well today. Ophthalmologists see hysterical blindness, neurologists encounter unexplained amnesia, and obstetricians witness pseudocyesis, which used to be called hysterical pregnancy. On the dissociative end of the spectrum, clinicians continue to encounter the phenomenon of multiple personalities, depersonalization, and dissociative fugue, where a person becomes disoriented and travels days at a time with no memory of who they are or where they have been.
And although we've come a long way since Mary's day, we know far less than you may think we do about the causes of mental illness. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the term hysteria was used to group together numerous unexplained phenomena, a kind of umbrella diagnosis. Yet despite increased categories and refined assessment techniques, the field of psychology continues to suffer from similar diagnostic dilemmas.
I'm going to stop it there. These people sure talk quickly, don't they?
For example, in 2000...
There we go. So that's like the brief overview version of hysteria, like how we got to, how we got to Freud's hysteria. So I'm sure that many of you have had the experience where you have a physical symptom or a problem and you're not sure why, right? So it doesn't necessarily seem that you got injured in any way, or you go to the doctor and they do some scans and they say, oh, like we're not sure, like we didn't find anything. So one of the things is that this is related to kind of like everyday experiences. So a lot of people have stomach issues when they get really stressed, right? And we don't know the exact mechanism by which that works. We don't know exactly how and why the anxiety turns into a stomach problem, but it does. So this is related to right? The fact that like stress and anxiety can show up in our bodies in these ways that might not make sense to us is on a continuum with the experiences of the hysterics. Right? So they're also feeling a symptom and it's not clear why, but we're pointing to an underlying kind of strong emotion. Oops. Yeah. Does anyone want to share? If you want, it's also like, it's, it's everybody's health. But sometimes you have things or someone in your family has things, and we just don't know why, right? We don't. There's some very interesting books on trauma and its relationship to the body. There's like now some neurologists and some somatic therapists who will examine how at extreme times of stress, our body does have strong reactions.
Can it be considered that it's genetic? Can it be considered like a genetic?
I think it depends. Like, I think we could say that there's certain kinds of dispositions we have, like you have a tendency towards something. And sometimes they are, right? Like sometimes we find a gene and we find a new name for a disease. And sometimes we don't, or we even have like diagnostic terms that don't say much. So idiopathic hypersomnia means you're hypersomnic. That's you're sleeping too much. And the word idiopathic just means we don't know what the heck the origin is. So you can receive a diagnosis that's kind of like empty, kind of a placeholder in this way.
Wait, but share what? I'm sorry, my Wi-Fi cut out. I wasn't sure what you were asking.
Oh, I was just like, if anybody, like this reminds anyone of something, or if they know an example from like media or real life, about this kind of like unexplained symptoms or this link between emotions in the body.
I mean, I kind of know one, but I'm not sure if it will work. Like if I explain it a little bit in like the way that I'm thinking of it, then it will, but I'm not sure as a whole it will. Like I'm thinking like PTSD, because like I have PTSD because something like bad happened when I was younger. So now every single time I hear a loud bang on like a door or a door close or anything, I end up like freaking out and jumping, and like I end up sobbing, like tears.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us. I think absolutely that PTSD shows up in the body, right, in these ways that we don't know. So your unconscious is associating the loud bang with a threat, right? That's what the kind of psychoanalytic explanation would say. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I have a stupid. It's a stupid question, but
you don't know it's stupid.
Does everybody go through PTSD, or like does everyone experience something where it makes them reflect back on like, oh crap?
I think you'll get very different answers from this depending on who you ask. I think we all live weird kind of small traumas from living in the kind of society we do. And I also think that like a kind of neoliberal capitalist society, I also think that there are like really big traumatic events, right? So wars, there are like deaths, there are like assaults. Yeah. So certainly like we tend to think of trauma. I'm going into the
Okay. So being scared of something is like trauma. Okay. All right.
It can be, right? It doesn't always, but it can be. There's ways that we get habits, things sediment in our bodies that we don't even think about. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Tal?
In regards to what he just said, something might happen when you're younger that you might think has been resolved, and then years later something similar might happen and your reaction can be like, you can have a PTSD like reaction that's linked to what happened when you were younger, but you're not really sure the connection.
Okay.
And you can develop like it's not just fear. So like it depends how you process trauma.
Okay.
Yeah, this has to do a bit with what we talked about last time, right? With this like regression, with this, that there's a link with the childhood self still that was used to like build ourself. Yeah. You guys are great, and I hope you're all okay. I was going to suggest that the next thing we do is take a 5-minute break, because I want to start. Like, I know you're all, of course, allowed to like get water, go to the bathroom, do what you need as you need to do it. But I feel like sometimes people feel more permission when I'm like, okay, it's 5 minutes. I'm also walking away. So.
Oh, I did that in high school all the time. To like cry or have an anxiety attack in the middle of class, and like when
sometimes you just need a break.
They would be like, go for a little walk.
Good. So what I'm going to do and recommend everyone else does, I'm gonna go use the toilet. I'm going to get some more tea. I'm gonna stretch and like look at some things that are very far away from your eyeballs, if you can. This is like lemon tea. It's a Korean tea. It's called yujacha. It's made from preserved lemons. So does it make sense? I'm gonna play it. I'll see you all in like 5 minutes.
I saw that video already.
So I hope that everybody got some sort of break in there. Yeah, some of you have been here the whole time. God bless. I also wanted to say that if people are interested in like resources related to the things that we're talking about in class, related to like mental health or support, or any of that, I'm always happy to do some research for you if you have questions and you don't know where to start, and you don't even have to tell me anything. I just want to be helpful because sometimes we all do have a little bit of trauma. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at this specific case study of a young woman. So her name was Ida Bauer, but her name in the cases, her nickname is Dora. And Dora came from a fairly well-off family. She saw Freud for 11 weeks, so, you know, like 3 months straight analysis. This would have been several days a week when she was 18. And so next to her family lived a family that was Herr and Frau K, so like Mr. and Mrs. K. And Kay tried to, as the story goes, kiss her when she was 14. And since then, the father reports when he says, Freud, I need you to treat her, that she's been kind of hysterical since then. And Dora's analysis, which we'll talk a bit less about today, but it really focuses on taking 2 of her dreams and exploring those. So, oops, let's see. I'm going to show a very short clip. Exactly. Right, a very short clip about this girl who was kissed when she was 14 by her creepy neighbor. And we will see some more details about the case. What did I say? Stop it at 13? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we're just gonna do it.
Imitated, and ambivalence is already starting. When friends exchange help, she had described. When denials like this happen,
it was right. Oh, it was right here. Is it there? Yeah.
brought her to Freud, a man who helped him with his syphilis in prior appointments, to kind of sort her out. I have no doubt, he said, that this incident is responsible for Dora's depression and irritability and suicidal ideas. She keeps pressing me to break off relations with Herr K, and more particularly with Frau K, whom she used to positively worship formerly. But that I cannot do, for to begin with, I myself believe that Dora's tale of the man's immoral suggestions is a fantasy that has forced its way into her mind. And besides, I am bound to Frau K by ties of honorable friendship, and do not wish to cause her pain. Most unhappy with her husband, of whom, by the way, I have no very high opinion. She herself has suffered a great deal with her nerves, and I am her only support. With my state of health, I need scarcely assure you that there is nothing wrong in our relations.
I wanted to skip to an earlier part, now I'm trying to find it. Let's see, kids, it's in here. Yes, okay. This is where I wanted to start. There.
In Freud's narrative, Dora was emotionally attached to her father, especially during his illnesses. Her mother's constant attention to domestic affairs, plus her father's illnesses, led to their estrangement. As Dora continued being dissatisfied with her family life, she left a suicide letter in a desk for her parents to find. For many people who run away from friendships and romantic relationships or family, it's often because of the unexpected and unwanted entanglements and expectations. Dora's family connected with the K's, and like in many situations, friends start helping each other. Over time, the family roles get interchanged. For example, Freud says of Dora that she had taken the greatest care of the K's two little children and been almost a mother to them. Dora had private conversations and influences from governesses, Frau K, Herr K, on top of her own family's influence. as the different values are imitated, and ambivalence is already starting. When friends exchange help, they naturally think of utility and how these friends can help in other ways.
We'll stop there. This video is too long, which is why I only wanted to show you a few minutes. But here's some facts about Dora. So Dora's family lived right next door to this other family, the Kays, Mr. and Mrs. K, Herr and Frau K. And her own parents had a very unhappy marriage. Her mother was kind of trapped in domesticity. So internet unstable, heck with that. What happened actually is that Dora's father, the very one who brought her in for psychoanalysis, was having an affair with his neighbor's wife, Mrs. K. And so Dora had primarily the experience where he tried to kiss her when she was 14, but also a meeting with him at a cottage where he hit on her when she was 16. And so this is kind of the complicated web within which Freud thinks the unconscious is playing, right? Where Dora's taking on the role of a parent, where Dora's in conflict about her father. And throughout much of this, they actually attribute, they say either this minor assault by Mr. K didn't happen, or you actually may have liked it. Yes. Yes. So the thought was that Dora is repressing in some way her unconscious, and that's what the problem is. The problem is not anything that happened to her in the world. Yeah, right, wild. So Dora, when she was 18, her father took her to Freud, and I listed like her primary symptoms. So she would lose her voice a lot, or like cough. There was a lot of throat things. She would have trouble breathing. They, said suicidal thoughts and expressions were a sign of hysteria, right? That what she's really doing is she's kind of overblowing something. She's taking something small, making it bigger and bigger and bigger. Oops. So there's a lot of different things that we would probably do with Dora today, and it's not clear that necessarily analysis is what she needs, right? Never mind, as many have said, it's not clear that the problem is actually with Dora here. Does anyone want to throw in the chat, like, I mean, okay, none of us have been to medical school, none of us are psychiatrists. What other kinds of things might we call Dora or might make sense rather than hysterical?
I don't think that she's hysterical whatsoever. I think that from early on trauma and sexual assault, a lot of things kind of like worried her. And maybe because this happens to me when I get anxious, I can't breathe properly because I feel like I'm just closing up. So she could have been like that. I nervous, like cough all the time. This usually happens to me too, and it's not because of anything. I think if she had a more normal routine, like things that kind of got her out of her funk, like a walk or like anything like that, it would kind of help her more. Because I mean, sexual assault is no joke, and like if someone's doing that to you at like 12, 13, 14, 16 years old, you're going to be messed up, and a lot of things are going to be wrong with your well-being because in your mind it's so clouded and hurt, and like just like trying to figure everything out, like why is it me, like why didn't God help me? Because during this time people were very religious, so it's like, why did God let this happen to me and everything? So it's like,
Yeah, so we might say, right, that Dora has some sort of like PTSD around the assault. We might say that Dora has an anxiety disorder, or she has depression. We might say that, yeah, Dora's not a problem at all, and she's in some sort of like toxic family web. Wouldn't want to have that family, right? So that for all of these reasons, basically Freud's version is that she actually does desire her neighbor, that she was sexually aroused. Yeah, the trigger warning. Freud does blame the victim that she was sexually aroused when he made his advances on her, and so that's actually, it's because she's denying her attraction that she's having all these weird symptoms. Yikes.
Can I just say one thing? Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Isn't like legally the age of consent like 16 or like older? Because before that you don't really like understand or grasp the idea of what's happening, because like something's actually happening like that right now, where there's like a YouTuber, and like when kids were like 12, 13 years old and he was 19, 23, they were like, oh my god, can you like kiss me, like can you please be my first kiss? And he was like, oh my god, yeah, sure, like whatever. And then they're like, wow, like he actually, like I can't believe like he actually did that. Like they consented to it and everything, but because they were at such a young age, they didn't understand what was happening, and like the grooming and all of that. Like a lot of things have been happening like that. So maybe it's like at that point she was like, oh yeah, like I wanted it, but then it's like you're looking back and you're like, I never wanted any of this.
Yeah, so you're making a good point, right? That Freud's explanation is that she secretly wants this, right? But like one of the motivations for age of consent laws is because we think that there's an age at which you can't offer that consent, right? In which it doesn't matter. What's this in the chat? Yeah, so this, gosh, this is like late 1890s Austria. I'm not sure what the age of consent was then, or it would maybe have been something very tiny, like 12. But there's a lot of problems here, right? There's a lot of problems that don't necessarily seem to be problems with the unconscious. So, oops, oh yeah, more thoughts, good. Yeah. Exactly. So we're going to talk, we have just a few more slides. We're going to talk a little bit about these unexplained illnesses and the other words and terms that are used and the ways that hysteria is explained. So often hysteria is called a kind of psychosomatic illness. And psychosomatic comes from, the first part's easy, it's psych, we see it's psyche, psychology, it means it's psychological. And soma is that old Greek term that has to do with the body. So we hear about if something is somatic, as in psychosomatic, what it means is that it's occurring at the interface of the psyche and the body. Yeah, so some people have phantom limb pain, right? Where actually, like, they do feel the pain. There is something happening. There is something that they are feeling. There is a phenomenon, and it's not faking it, right? But it's actually something that's being produced as, as a product of the relationship between the mind and the body. And this can go back to, like, there's a lot of people who live with chronic pain who take on things like meditation or other kinds of habits because they notice that if they focus on their pain, it often like literally does feel more. And that doesn't mean that one is bad for focusing on one's pain. What it means is that the ways we think do affect our bodies as well. So it's not even, psychosomatic illness is not even hypochondria. So hypochondria is like when I'm worried I'm going to get sick all the time, you know? So I have a nosebleed and I'm like, oh, I don't know, there's something in my brain, it's gonna fall out. And I cough because I was smoking, but then I'm like, oh no, it must be COVID. This kind of always jumping to a disease, that's also not psychosomatic illness. A psychosomatic illness shows up. It is there in the organs and in the body.
There's actually
So they talked about this. Sorry, go ahead.
COVID mask that says, "I don't have COVID, I just smoke."
Yeah, exactly. So in the video we saw there's some contemporary terms, contemporary diagnoses that are used to refer to psychosomatic illnesses that don't have the words hysteria in it, but kind of carry the inheritance. And so they usually give it the name conversion disorder or sometimes somatoform, so it has the relationship to the body. But really there's many people trying to figure this out in neuroscience. There's many people trying to figure this out in trauma theory. Nobody quite knows, right? Like, we know it's not wholly psychological. We know it's not wholly biological. Like, what exactly are the steps? How do we get from like A to Z, where Z is the symptom? So this is actually, this is a part of my research. My research that I'm writing my PhD on right now is primarily on the ways in which political and social experiences can show up in our bodies as psychosomatic illnesses. And hysteria is kind of one of the classical examples of this. Even though, as we've seen, some of the case studies are doubtful. Okay, sorry, don't be stressed. Psychoanalysis is like a lot, but also it's like stories. So all we really know is this kind of outline where we know that Freud says it's about a wish or an unconscious desire. And it gets repressed by the ego. Remember, we had the ego making decisions between the little angel and the little devil. And then usually he says that this symptom shows up either in a previous injury, or something that's given you trouble in the past, or a symbolic location. So that might have to do with Freud, with sex, in some sort of way, so that it's not accidental for him where the symptom shows up in the body. So on Freud's interpretation, we have Mr. K who kissed Dora, and that Dora supposedly felt a desire for him, but knew it was inappropriate. He's married, he's much older, he's a friend of the family. And briefly, Freud connected the throat to sexual acts that involve the throat. So things like fellatio. So it is quite bare bones still, right? We don't know, like, okay, so does the unconscious talk directly to the muscles in my throat? Like, what is going on? How are we getting these symptoms at all? And what he essentially came to, which is kind of a non-answer answer, is that he said there's something called somatic compliance. So somatic is with the body, right? And if you're compliant with something, well, if you're non-compliant with something, then you're not cooperating with them. If you're compliant with something, you're cooperating, you're helping out. So you might be called non-compliant if you're a protester, right? You're not complying with the police. So Freud said that there's a kind of natural tendency of our body, the soma, to go along with our unconscious wishes. That there's some ability here to pick up on it and follow that direction. that there's a kind of intimacy between the body and the unconscious, somehow, a kind of sympathy, where the body says, okay, you feel this? Okay, I feel this, but it shows differently. And so you're going to have a few pages from Freud's analysis of Dora to read this week as well. And in this is where Freud makes this kind of discovery. And I say it's an answer and a non-answer because it's also kind of empty. Like, it doesn't say how or why it picks up on what our unconscious wish is. It just says, I don't know, kind of the way you would talk about like memory foam, like absorbing something. It seems to be kind of passive, right? The body's just there and it's like, oh, okay, we're getting some anger. I guess we're gonna hurt the shoulder now. Let's go. Right? The body is not doing very much. So that's how Freud tries to fix it or answer it, and also how he fails. So good. We'll finish this part soon and then we'll talk about recording. So a lot of the symptoms that were associated with hysteria are symptoms that are traditionally associated with femininity, like being too emotional rather than being rational, or kind of over exaggerating things. And it like a ton of people, a ton of scholars, feminist scholars above all, but others as well, have said it was used as kind of a catch-all to take any woman who was behaving particularly badly. In Dora's case, for example, a woman who was like refusing to put up with numerous like sexual advances from her neighbor, to manage them, right? To say, no, you're the problem because you're not obeying society's norms, right? Homosexual women who were hysterical, that this is a way of being able to manage them politically and socially. And so we saw a number of debates. I don't know, I was not yet born. I know, pretty sure most of you were not. But throughout the 1970s and 80s, especially in France, fitting, there was a big debate among feminist scholars about how to treat the figure of the hysteric. So these actual women, Dora, should we treat her as, okay, she was actually resisting all of these social forces, and maybe she was allowing herself like to be in a situation where she's just opposing everything that stands for what she needs to do, right? Where they're saying, okay, you need to like behave yourself and carry yourself carefully and daintily, and no, she's like revolting because she's having a convulsion, right? So that's the story about like how maybe the hysteric is a resistant hero for us. But some people still say, no, like, look, we look at the actual documents from these women, they were really, really unhappy. They were really repressed and oppressed. And if they were having convulsions, it was because their body was in such huge amounts of stress and pressure. So that's kind of a historical question. And it's also a question about, like, is there a meaning to illness? When is there a meaning to illness? How could we tell?
Miss, I have a question.
Yes.
Because I just wanted to know, when did it become taboo to be sexually active? Because I remember like prostitutes used to be like a good job to have, like prostitution, because it was like giving pleasure towards somebody, and then it was very taboo. And now it's like, kind of like people are like, okay, like everyone's just having sex, like who gives a shit? Like when did it kind of have a culture shift of like, oh, this is taboo, like you shouldn't be having sex, and like
blah, 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 blah.
Oh, I think part of the answer is that it has waxed and waned, right? So we were just talking about all the horny ancient Greeks, and then we have periods in which, often with different kinds of religions, but again, this changes across the world. Yeah, definitely. Christianity has a large bone to pick with sex, some more wildness, and then it's like, so Freud, this is like right in the midst of the Victorian era. So this is one of the more like repressive, like we really don't talk about sex times. Dante?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, a lot of that repression comes from Puritan colonists that left Europe and Renaissance liberalism. They came to North America and they were one of the groups that really pushed it back into the Dark Ages, so to say.
Yeah, this very, it's like linked to, this is a world views class, our perspectives, right, on sex, on talking about sex, on sexual assault, on all of these things are often attached to and piggybacking on the other values, right? And sometimes that's just like who happens to be traveling or migrating a certain way. We get things that are accidental, but they still have a sense to them.
I have a question. Are drunken one night stands considered like sexual assault if you're not like incapacitated? Like if you're not aware of the situation and you have no self-control, is it considered sexual assault or no?
Most sexual assault centers will say yes, like if you're not able to consent, but it is like, yeah, it is a question of like which amount of drunk you are, I guess. But I would say, just as we say that like children can't necessarily consent, and we might tend to say that someone very, very old with dementia, we might say that they can't quite consent, right? We might think, whether it be alcohol or like you're, I don't know, stoned off your mind on some other drug, we might think, right, that that's a reason for concern. Well, I wish you guys could all come to my other class too. But it's at a different institution.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Okay, regarding the drunk question, what if the two partners are drunk, like the same level of drunk, would that still be considered sexual assault? And also, if the both partners, it's still considered? Well,
I mean, no. I'm just saying, like, no. This is exactly the reason why we can't have a solid answer, right? So, like, sometimes, which is also like sometimes children experiment with each other's genitals, right? And we're not necessarily like they both sexually abused each other. We might be like, it was weird. Yeah, I would say it depends on the consent. As they very strongly depends on what you've agreed to, what you can still agree to, and what that stage is like.
Also, okay,
if you consent sober and then you have sex drunk, is it rape or not?
You need more information, for sure. So we're gonna get there, but just so you know, because there was a couple things. So I'm gonna tell you the asynchronous activities. Then I'm gonna tell you about International Women's Week. And then we're gonna have a short what's going on about maybe recording. And this is already linked on Leah, so everything is linked there, you can find it. So you're gonna have just a couple pages from Freud, from Dora's case. You're gonna have a short piece from an author named Siri Hustvedt, who's writing contemporarily about hysteria and its kind of descendants. There's a questionnaire on Hustvedt. It is like mostly true, false questions, and it will be graded for content. As always, these are open book things because we are in the pandemic. So feel free to take your time. And there's a short video performance that I think you should watch. Because one of the things is that hysteria is a like cultural milestone, a trope, a topic that we keep coming back to. So just a couple of years ago, there was a play in Montreal about hysteria and what it means and if we can reclaim it. Okay. Yes, so I also wanted to let you know that March 8th to 12th is International Women's Week at Vanier. So all week they're having free events on Zoom. There's a lot of live conversations and interviews. There's some performance screenings. There's even a dance workshop. And so if you go online to this link, you can see the full list of events that are on there. And this year's theme is intersections. So not only focusing on gender, but on gender oppression's relation to other kinds of oppression, to racial oppression, to sexual oppression, to disability oppression. So I highly, highly recommend that you go to it. There's a lot of things, and I'll remind you next week as well. Okay, I'm very glad that everybody wants to be able to have conversations about sex and assault. I want to make sure that we don't just like bomb the chat with too many in case there's someone who might be triggered or uncomfortable by it. But maybe I can bring in someone from like the Sexual Resource Center or something like this and see if we can have a little presentation. So what I wanted to do is, last week there was a question about recording the class. So it can't be fully asynchronous. That means every week cannot be like the last week we had where everything's pre-recorded, because it is synchronous in the delivery. But I could potentially record the session we meet live and upload it. So because Vanier uses shared Zoom licenses, this also means that I can't make it only my face that is recorded. So one of the things is that I would need to get everyone's consent. We would only share it with this class, but I would need to get everyone's consent. So I made this short, it's like a quiz, but it's really just a survey. So I need to know, like, if you're generally fine with this, you know. I would like to know if we record the class, if it will, you don't have to have your cameras on. No, it would be like this. But I would like to know if this would significantly change your attendance and participation. So yes, most weeks I would not attend. No, most weeks I would still attend, but maybe occasionally. And if we record it, it will only be available for 1 week afterwards, because there's this problem with online school where everybody waits till the last week and then they have to watch like 1 million hours worth of videos. So just like if this changes your mind, and then how strongly you want it to be recorded. So it is possible. There's definitely some people for which it's going to be really, really advantageous. There might be some of you who it really helps to have something exactly at 6 in order to make sure that you do it.
Bye, Miss. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Miss.
Thank you, everybody, for all your participation today. It was great.
Bye. Be safe.
Mhm.